Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another Watford special, election special actually, where we've been going through talking to all of the parliamentary candidates and getting their views on various things to do with Watford and on a national level. We are on the second round now. We're less than a week away from the election, and today I'm very pleased to have Nick Lincoln, representing the UKIP party, on the show with me. Come and say hello, Nick.
Hello everyone. Hello to you, Chris. Thanks for inviting me back.
No, I'm fine. We had you on the show right back in February. So
yeah, it seems like a decades ago now.
That's right, and I'm sure a lot has happened in your world since we did the last interview. So this is an opportunity really to catch up with you, see how things have gone, what people have been saying, etc., etc. So I know there's been a load of hustings going on. I mean, more hustings than I didn't even know what the word was a year or so ago. But it seems to be like flavour of the month these days. And yeah, I know there were 3 this week, so I'm sure you can let us know how they've gone. But there've been a number of them over the last couple of months. And so have you been to most of them? And how have you fared? How do you think you've got on there?
Yes, I've been to the ones. Everyone I've been invited to, Chris, I have gone to. I mean, unfortunately, some of the schools in the area saw fit not to invite me as a UKIP candidate, which is disappointing. But I've been to everyone I have been invited to. So, as you said, this week we've had 3 on the bounce, which have been very draining. I think in total, including coffee mornings, 8 or 9, and I know that Richard Harrington, who's the incumbent MP, says he's never known anything like it. I think in 2010 there were barely 2 hustings in the Watford constituency, but it's just ramped up in this area, the interest, because it's such a marginal seat, and to be frank, the neighbouring constituencies aren't particularly close in terms of who's going to win or who people think are going to win. So the drive to have hustings here is very apparent, and then I sound like a rock star, but we play to pack halls. I mean, we had a hustings last Thursday at Beech and Grove Baptist Church, and an FT journalist came along and reported on it the next day because Watford's such a key margin. They sent the heavyweights came down, and he said we're like an aging rock band. We just turn up from church hall to church hall to school to school, and we all kind of know each other. So it's been really good, and I think, as I said to you back in Feb, for me it's just an honour to be part of it, and to be part of a constituency where there is so much interest. It's just been great. So yeah, they're good, but they're done now. I think we're all hustinged out. The last one was last night in Abbots Langley, at the Methodist church there. The actual hall itself was overflowing, so they had to put people into a separate room who were standing and then sort of pipe the PA through there so people could hear, which is fantastic given that the general consensus is that people don't really get interested in politics or democracy. Well, I can tell you in Watford they most certainly do, and have done for the last 4 weeks or so. But we are hustinged out.
Well, that is good to hear, though, that people are at least interested. So I'll be very curious to see what the turnout figures for Watford end up being, because clearly with the number of hustings that we've had, one would suggest that it would be above average in the Watford constituency. But we'll have to wait and see for that, I guess.
Yeah.
So where have you actually been campaigning? Out on the streets and stuff. Where have you been? I mean, because it's fairly large, the constituency. I mean, there's 25,000 different dwellings, so it's quite a lot to get around everyone.
No, but you've got almost right. If you just invert your numbers, I think it's 52,000 dwellings.
Oh,
yeah, I know that from doing. We sent out this electoral address to every household in Watford, and it's done through the Royal Mail, and it's 52,000 households, I think, and that's off the top of my head. Maybe it's 25,000. I think it's 52,000. I mean, yeah, it's a big town in terms of electorate. It's way more than the average size of a constituency, and we're UKIP. We don't have the infrastructure the other parties have yet, because we've only been around in political terms a very short time. So it's hard work for us to cover a constituency the size of Watford. We've been around, we focus a lot on, I mean, I live in Garston, and so we focus around here and the neighbouring wards, so Woodside and Meriden, and Carpenter's Park is also very strong for us, which is to the southern end of the constituency. And, you know, because of our limited numbers, our limited resources, we have to go where we think the support is. So there are parts of Watford that we just haven't been able to touch. But, you know, with every election, we kind of ratchet up the membership, we ratchet up the support, we get more people on board, more activists who can do it. But I'm sure, you know, the other candidates will tell you the same, and you probably know intuitively, it's hard work. I mean, it's just a lot of legwork, and the more people you have doing it, the easier it gets. So this campaign is way above anything we've ever done before in Watford, way above what we did last year for the mayoral campaign, and every year we're just building a little bit further and establishing ourselves. I mean, this is the first time we've ever had boards up around Watford. Now, we haven't got boards up to the extent that Dorothy and certainly Richard have got up, but we have UKIP boards up around Watford, and that for us, that's a big thing, because as I say, we've never done it before, so everything's incremental, but we just, you know, if the other parties knew what we do with so little resources, I think they'd be firstly amazed, and I think, you know, secondly slightly envious, because we get everything out of our membership, and they chip in way above their weight in terms of input and effort.
So, I mean, on the doorsteps, I mean, how's the reaction been to UKIP? Because obviously it's got quite a lot of press in both in good and bad. It's quite, there've been quite extreme views in both respects towards UKIP. So what are people on the doorstep actually? How are they responding to you?
Okay, well, I'll give this answer, and take it with a pinch of salt, because it's a would-be politician giving this answer. But I can, hand on heart, say that it has been almost overwhelmingly responsive. Those places where we've knocked on doors and engaged with people, it's been fantastic. I mean, I was out canvassing with our Three Rivers candidate in Carpenter's Park, Lee Osborne, this week, and the people that were in, who weren't, you know, at work or what have you, just absolutely biting our hands off. A, because nobody else had bothered to knock on their doors, which is quite surprising, given this is such a marginal seat. I'd have thought all the legacy parties would have put all their resources into Watford. I'm not sure that's been the case. It's just been uniformly positive. I think people are just they just want something different. They want change. They are fed up, and it is the over, you know, these recurring themes of, you know, where are my children going to go to school, and when they've gone through school, how are they going to find a job, and if they find a job, how is it going to be anything other than on the minimum wage, and if they get a job that's not the minimum wage, how are they going to find a house? You know, these recurring questions that the legacy parties just don't want to address, and it's just led to this wave of disenchantment from just honest people, hard-working people who just want a voice. And so it has been, you know, really positive. And I think there may be this perception that if you go door knocking for UKIP, you're going to get abused and called various unpleasant epithets. Well, that just, I can tell you hand on heart, it just simply has not happened. The worst that's happened to me is that someone's seen the rosette and shut the door on my face. And that's been it. So it's been really, really good. How that translates on May the 7th into votes, I don't know. You know, because Watford is such a key marginal seat, everybody in this constituency knows their vote really does count. So we won't get protest votes for UKIP in Watford, I don't think. People that vote UKIP in Watford are voting for UKIP, whereas in other constituencies, people might vote UKIP to send a message to predominantly the Tories and the surrounding constituencies. In Watford, they don't. You know, every vote matters, and our message has been to people on the doorstep. It's not necessarily about winning Watford for UKIP. It's about getting the vote share, because in a hung parliament, if in a metropolitan, basically an outer London suburb, which is what Watford is now, if we can get a decent vote share in a hung parliament, that does matter, and your vote does count. So to answer your question succinctly, it's been a fantastic response on the doorstep, and come the next election, the general election in 2020, I think it'll be stronger. We'll have more members, we'll have more activists, more money, and then we can start to compete on a level playing field with the legacy parties who have all this backing, and of course who are throwing money at Watford, throwing activists at Watford, because they all recognise that you have to win Watford if you want to win the nation.
Have you found that people have been, this is probably the first time you've been out doing this in such anger, but have you found that people are fairly set in their ways, or do you think that there are a significant number of people that are really quite undecided at the moment about which way to vote?
The people we've spoken to who knocked on their doors, they seem to be very pro UKIP, and that is it. There are some people who are still undecided, and there's no getting away from that. And there are still a lot of people who think, well, I'd like to vote for X, but it's going to split Y's vote and let Z in and so forth. You do get that. And of course you've got the thing of the postal vote as well. I mean, the postal voters will have probably all voted by now. They had the chance to do that 2 weeks ago. So you're talking to people that might have already voted anyway. So it's a bit of a redundant conversation. I think the UKIP voter already knows how they're going to vote. I think it's the people that would probably never vote UKIP are deciding whether they should waste their vote with Dorothy or waste it with Matt or waste it with Richard.
Okay.
So I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean waste in a very positive way.
Okay. Well, this is a question from one of the constituents. He's Paul Roberts. He's asked, what's been the reaction to you from the other candidates?
It's been very good, and I want to just get this on the record. We've done all these hustings together. As I say, we've done 3 on the bounce this week, and you know what? I think if we went down the pub and had a few glasses of wine and a few pints of beer, I think we'd get on like a house on fire. They've been very accommodating to me. I've been accommodating to them. They're all good people. They all believe in what they believe in. I mean, I don't believe in a lot of what they do believe in, but they do believe in it themselves, and they're in it for the right reasons. And it's been really interesting. And there are a diverse range of candidates. There's Richard Harrington, of course, the incumbent, Dorothy and Matt, but there's also Aidan for the Greens, and they've got it's a philosophy that I don't believe in at all, but he does and they do, and it is something completely different. And then you've also got the trade unions and socialist coalition, Tusk, who are probably more aligned with the Greens as well. And we have massive differences of opinion in how things could be better in this country and how to get there. But we've got on like a house on fire, probably to the disappointment of some of the audiences that we've not been more vitriolic with each other. But they're a good bunch of people, and it's been a pleasure to be part of this whole run up to May the 7th.
What's been the key question relating to local stuff in Watford that's been put to you on the doorsteps? Has there been something in particular that keeps coming up about Watford that people have been asking?
I think the NHS nationally, but also of course the NHS in terms of Watford General Hospital and the health campus has been a recurring theme. What are we doing with the health campus? Is it going to happen? It's been talked about for years now, and there seems to be this kind of stasis where nothing's going on. That's been a recurring theme. So, Dorothy Thornhill and Richard Harrington have been involved with that for the last 5 years. Dorothy for longer, so they kind of speak on that. It's the never-ending dilemma of the lack of housing in Watford, despite the fact that we've seen this town become a building site from south to north and east to west for the last 15 years plus. That's a recurring theme. The pressure on our schools is another one. They're just the kind of subjects that you think would come up, Chris, in a metropolitan suburb such as Watford. It is just about the infrastructure. How are we going to solve this relentless pressure? And obviously, I'm not going to go into a political speech now. We've got our view about it, and the other parties have got their view about it. And those have been the recurring themes. Things that I thought that might come up that haven't done. The Save Watford Met campaign, which is pretty active in the area. That hasn't been mentioned. HS2 hasn't come up. The farm terrace allotments have come up to a degree. We had a hustings on Wednesday night at the Boys' Grammar, which maybe we'll come back to. That was the most unpleasant of the lot of them, and Sarah Jane Trebar was there, who you know, she's the campaigner to protect the farm terrace allotment. So she gave Dorothy, you know, a good grilling, and Dorothy, you know, she took it and answered the questions. But they're just the kind of questions you would expect. So it really is the NHS and Watford General Hospital, housing, schooling, and so forth.
Have people been sort of, have you got a feeling that people of Watford are hurting as a result of the austerity measures, obviously paying down the debt, which has been the major focus of the Conservative government? The real focus there is we've got to get the debt down, we've got to get debt down, regardless of what kind of poverty and suffering it creates at the, you know, at the lower level, you know, the lower level, if you like, of income.
We've had it to a degree, and you know, with the Greens on the platform with us, and then trade unions and socialists against cuts, or the trade union and socialist coalition task. I mean, they have an extreme view. You know what? You know, people say that the coalition has you know, has attacked the deficit and the debt, but the fact is the national debt is 600 billion bigger than it was when the coalition were formed in 2010. It's now 1.5 trillion, and we're still running an annual deficit, the best part of 90 billion. So whether you agree with austerity or not, they certainly haven't done anything about addressing the underlying problem that we're just spending far too much as a state that we take in taxation. Austerity has not really come on. Thankfully, you know, Watford is generally a pretty affluent area. Yes, there'll be pockets where people are less well off. I don't think there's poverty in the Charles Dickens sense of the word in Watford. There are certainly people who are very poorly off. Do we have absolute poverty? I wouldn't have thought so in Watford. And we're you know, it's a buoyant area. It always has been. It's the centre of commerce. It's the commercial hub of Hertfordshire. That's not really raised its head too much. We've had a couple of hustings at schools where the teachers have complained about the cut in education, and that's pretty much.
You still there, Nick?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can now. You just went offline for a second.
Okay.
One of the things that you know, I hear quite a bit, because obviously there's been, I don't know, in this election it seems that there's been a lot more debate on the street, certainly where I go, and I'm out and about quite a lot myself. Seems to be a lot more debate, and one of the things that comes up is with so much tax being collected, and there's been a lot of additional taxation in various sort of some people call it underhand ways, but it's like not direct taxation, but we're grabbing stuff, anything that we can, wherever we can. You know, with 45 pence in the pound being paid towards an overhead, which is essentially what government is. It's a management function. That there must be better ways of using that taxpayers' money, and I think a lot of people are bothered about what seems to be a fairly substantial squandering of money. For example, you get people in the high street running large enterprises who are taking people from the job centre on very low wages, and essentially then they're being topped up by you know, like benefits and stuff like that to make it a living wage, essentially. And what we're really doing is we're using taxpayers' money to subsidise businesses who don't want to pay a fair salary. And that's come up a few times. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's not come up in the hustings we've done. I mean, listen, I'm a libertarian. I think, you know, the government there is, the better. And I think to criticise businesses for subsidising the wages they're not paying, that people aren't fair, is looking through the telescope at the wrong end. Perhaps if we didn't tax businesses from start to finish, perhaps if their business rates weren't so appallingly high, perhaps if they weren't earn national insurance at 13% on everything their employees earn, I think we need to cut back on the state will never have enough money. The state is a monster, and you feed it with taxation, and then it wants more and more. More government departments spring up. I think we need to have a reevaluate how we look at society. The best way, I think, to help the poorest people in society are thriving entrepreneurial. That starts from the base up. Small businesses are the component of this country. You can be one to have a section on small businesses. We need to help these people. Government needs to get out of their way by cutting business rates, by encouraging businesses, getting people working in proper jobs where there are career options. This whole system of tax credits, you rub from Peter, you give it to Paul, and then you give it to Mand, and pays it to her, she gets taxed. If you looked at it from fresh, you think this is absolutely insanity, but it's just crept up over the last 40 years. The rat stick of creeping socialism, is how it works. And we need to have a fundamental rethink. That's my view on that. And I can't stress enough, it's insane to tax or a business the money HMRC, and then it comes back to the employees of that business through numerous hands in HMRC and the civil service who earn salaries. That's just a road to perdition, and we need to have a review, and we need to be honest enough to speak to the public about it. And ultimately, the 1.5 trillion debt, we have this conversation, we spend more just paying the interest on the national debt, Chris, than we do on our armed forces. It's like having the world's biggest interest-only mortgage, and we can barely pay it. And at some stage, we've just got to pay the capital back as well. And, you know, the other parties just want to forget about the national debt. Well, I'm sorry, it's a real issue, and we have to look at government spending, the whole role of government in our society. And I'm from the view, the less government you have, generally, the better it is for everybody in society. Of course, you need government there to help the poorest and weakest, but government is this enormous sort of blood-sucking vehicle that just wants to tax, and it hasn't worked. To be honest, to say it just doesn't work better.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed as well is that I mean, the young people today, I mean, I think the average age of the first-time buyer is now 37, and that's a lot higher than when we bought our first properties. I mean, Watford's becoming, you know, like it's a really difficult town. I mean, I know we've got a problem with a nation that is obsessed with buying property, but it's also
just a little bit.
It's also backed up with renting, which is more expensive often than if people can get a mortgage. So yeah, there's a real problem here with obviously the getting enough money to put down to buy somewhere, but at the same time having to pay fairly extortionate rental because we've basically got a shortage of all sorts of housing stock. I mean,
yeah, breaking up a bit. General question about the housing problem.
Yeah, it's just a general question really about how, you know, your views really on that situation, which is, you know, obviously first-time buyers are what stimulates the market in many respects. So we've got a real situation here in Watford. I mean, it is a problem because
you have got a real no. Okay, I hope you can hear me, Chris. It's just breaking up a little bit there.
I can hear you now.
Let me know. If I touch the screen, I can see. Well, if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
You can hear me, okay. Yeah, I mean, there seems to be an insatiable and an incurable problem in Watford of housing. We've built all over this town. We're looking to build a green belt in the war, and I think we need to have an honest conversation about what's causing this housing, which is the planning process is archaic and pain. But the line is, in the 12 months to September last year, we had 624,000 people in the country. Yes, people leave the country as well. The net migration figures in this country, in the country last year, were 3,000. Now that's equivalent to a city the size of Hull. Now, where are we going to build a hull for these people, and where are we going to build a hull for these people next year and the year after if these figures are replicated? So we have this incredible for housing, these incredibly archaic, painful planning laws, and we have the green belt all valid. So obviously, from a quick, let's say we have to have immigration to be controlled. We cannot have the level of immigration we've had, because it's just detrimental to our society at many levels, infrastructure being the most obvious. We have to be creating brownfield sites. UKIP think we can build around, there's potential to build 2.5 million properties on field sites, but that's expensive to do, so we need to incentivize property development. And there are 300,000 entities in this country. Now, we need to incentivize those properties, get them out, and your rent being as expensive as mortgage. Mortgage, yes, of course, it is. We live in a 0.5%. When the base rates go up, mortgages will go up. That, to some extent, will take the heat out of the property market, because you'll see people default. I'm not saying that's a solution, but that's just an economic fact. But whether it's mortgages, lack of house, the rent, the cost of rent, the underlying driver is there's just an insatiable demand for property, and that is not going to go away. We build properties, high-density estates in Watford for the best 15 years, and yet there's still relentless pressure. So unless we address cause and have an adult conversation with the electorate, we are never ever going to get rid of this housing crisis.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real toughie, and but it's a real issue. I mean, I know that you know, I talk to young people, and it's a real worry, you know, and first time really that the next generation are going to struggle more than their parents did, I guess. But one of the other things that comes up quite a lot in my conversations is zero contract hours. I'm surprised if that hasn't come up, because you know, there's a lot of people complaining that there's no job security and stuff like that. I mean, there are pros and cons of zero contract hours, but is it on the agenda to do anything about that with UKIP?
Yeah, it came up at one of the Hustings zero contract hours. Without sounding like a broken record, the European Union came out with something called the Temporary Agency Work Directive, which basically gave temping workers, temps, the same rights as full-time workers, and it wiped the temp market. You know, again, it's the law of unintended consequence. So employers turn to 0 hours contracts, and they need to be reformed. We think 0 hours workers should have rights, and it isn't our manifesto we would do with that. I'm not going to go into the minute detail, but I think all the parts of that. However, there are certain industries that work on 0 hours contracts, niche industries, security being one. There are people who want to do them. So, you know, we can't throw out the baby with the bathwater, which is the Labour approach to this. Again, they want to ban it, regulate it, and, you know, until it just dies, and then they'll subsidise it, what have you. You know, despite the fact that 68 Labour MPs had staff on effectively 0 hours contracts. I mean, they get upset when you say that, but their contracts had no specified hours. Now, to me, no specified hours means 0 hours. But that's by the by. We think it needs reviewing. We don't want it to be exploitative, but there's no doubt for lots of employees as well as employers, there's a role for 0 hours contracts. But ultimately, we want an economy where people aren't working those kind of jobs. You know, a flourishing economy where there are real jobs and there's real growth and real chance for career progression onto full-time contracted employment.
Yeah, I mean, move on to Europe now. You brought it up there. I listened to Nigel Farage's speech that was put out the other day at the European Union when he was talking about the refugees from Libya, I think it was, and the lack of capability to do anything about that situation, which is fairly serious, really. Has that kind of conversation come up much with you?
Yeah, well, again, at one Hustings, and this is quite a confrontational Hustings. It was at the boys' grammar on Wednesday, and I think most of the audience were existing Watford Borough councillors, so it's very tribal and parochial, and not a great advert for democracy, sadly. And the question came up, and you know, Farage has spoken about this, and our stance on this is that we follow what, in this instance, Angela Merkel and the Germans have said, which is that we've got to stem this problem or sort this problem at its source. You know, we have to make Europe a less attractive destination, and we have to make North Africa, as best we can, a more attractive place for these people to want to stay in and live in. And that's not forgetting, of course, that this whole catastrophe was caused by Cameron and Sarkozy bombing the hell out of Libya in 2011, not having any plan for the vacuum that was subsequently there when Gaddafi was toppled. And it is not a particularly pleasant place at the moment. But we have to send a message out that this illegal economic migration over international borders is not going to be acceptable. And that's what the Germans are saying. You know, at the minute, these poor souls are going on these boats across the Mediterranean. They're going to Italy. The Italians, under the so-called Dublin Agreement, that, you know, whichever country you first disembark on in Europe should be your point of asylum. But tacitly or overtly, the Italians are waving these people through. They're ending up in Germany. The Germans are bearing a large brunt of the numbers of these asylums. That's causing a lot of tension there. And the last thing we need in Germany is tension upon racial lines, so that the Germans are now saying, hold on, you know, we can't do this anymore, and we need to address the problem at source. So we're already giving aid to Libya. The UKIP position is that we need to give more of our aid budget to Libya. There's this hoary old canard that UKIP are against foreign aid, which is absolute rubbish. What we're for is focused foreign aid where it's needed, and there's an absolute desperate need for foreign aid in North Africa and Libya now. But more than that, it's trade. Because, of course, North Africa potentially could be a fantastically fertile agricultural area, but the people of that part of the world simply cannot compete with the European Union, this great landmass over the Mediterranean, because of the common agricultural policy, which absolutely discriminates against the African farmer to protect the European Union farmer. They don't trade on an equal footing. You know my view on the European Union. You know, the CAP is a disaster. We need trade in that area to make that place a better place to stay in, so these people don't want to flee. But the underlying real issue here is that North Africa, and Libya especially, now is the hub of the greatest trading in illegal human trafficking that we've ever seen. And these people that get on these boats, they're paying about £1,000 per head to get on these death traps. The money is going into the hands of the militia who, in quotes, own Libya, these various Islamic factions that are fighting each other, but they've all come together to get in on this human trafficking trade because there's so much in it. So there's vast amounts of money going to these human traffickers into the hands of people that don't have our interests or any of the West interests at their heart. And, you know, if you support that we should be taking on these asylum seekers in potentially millions from Africa, you are de facto saying you support international trafficking of human beings, many of whom will die a watery death, and the Mediterranean will be their grave. So we have to address this at source, but we have to make it clear this is not an option. You cannot come into Italy, because it's just going to be chaos. And again, it's not necessarily a popular stance, but, you know, UKIP, we're not about saying what is popular, we're about saying what is right and what is pragmatic. And as I can't say it enough, Angela Merkel and the Germans are saying exactly the same thing as UKIP on this.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. What just sort of finishing off with a couple of sort of fairly light, easy questions for you. What do you think the scale of tactical voting is going to be in this election? Because there have been quite a few reports saying if you vote for UKIP, it's a vote for Labour, and, you know, all this kind of thing. But do you think people are going to vote tactically, or do you think they're going to say, well, do you know what, I ought to take responsibility with my vote and vote from the heart?
That, you know, if I knew the answer to that question, Chris, I would be a much happier man. I honestly don't know. I think a lot of people have had it up to here, actually, and they realise that if they vote the same way they've always voted for one of the legacy parties, they will get what they've always got. So they're not bothered now. And part of me also thinks it's quite an insult. You know, you get these flyers through your door saying a vote for X is a wasted vote. You'll only let Y in. I mean, to me, that's very insulting, because your vote is never a wasted vote. It's your vote. You vote the way you feel it's right. Just because you might not vote for the party that ultimately wins does not in any way mean it's wasted. In Watford, because it's such a marginal seat, we won't pick up the protest vote. People that vote for UKIP will vote for UKIP because they want to vote for UKIP. So there may be some tactical voting. I hope there isn't. I think the scales are falling off people's eyes now in terms of the established parties and what they've done and what they will do going forward. They are pretty much of a muchness. Yeah, Red Ed will tax and spend a bit quicker, but for heaven's sake, the national debt is 1.5 trillion now, and the Tories are supposed to be the economic gurus, at least compared to Labour. Well, the national debt has gone up by 600 billion under their watch. GDP is creeping ahead. The employment figures are fine, but who can really say they feel better off now than they did 5 years ago? Who can really say all those new jobs are proper jobs where there are real hopes and aspirations for going up the career ladder? I mean, how many of those jobs are those people on the minimum wage? I think there's a real level of discontent, and I don't think the protest vote or tactical voting in Watford is going to be that much of an effect on our campaign. I can't talk for the other parties. Maybe some people will vote Dorothy to keep Richard out, and they'll vote Matt to keep Dorothy out, and all this yesterday's politics for yesterday's politicians. But the UKIP voter in Watford, they will vote UKIP because they want change, and they've seen through it. They've just had enough of the rhetoric and the rubbish and the legacy parties.
Do you think it's the end of two-party politics?
Well, I don't know. Listen, I'd never say it's the end of anything. I think it's the start of 4, 5, 6-party politics, but that could change again in 5, 10 years. So I don't say it's the end. I think I'm a politician, I suppose, in quotes, although I'm not in office. So I am fascinated by this election, as I'm sure you are. But I think a lot of people who have never really got involved in the process before are interested in this election, because nobody knows. Nobody knows, and speaking to the other candidates over the last 3 or 4 weeks, they don't really know who's going to win Watford, and nobody really knows who's going to win the country, although nobody's going to win outright. I mean, it will be a coalition of sorts, and heaven forbid, it could be a 1974 where we have another election. 2 elections in the same year. It's happened before. Nobody knows what's going to happen, and I think we are entering a prolonged period of multi-party politics, which maybe then will drive pressure to reform the first-past-the-post system. I don't want to sound like a hypocrite, because I've always believed in the first-past-the-post system, because I now support a party that is in no way favoured by that at all. I'm not going to suddenly say I do favour it. However, if we have a protracted period of time where there are 4 or 5 or 6 parties consistently getting MPs with no overall majority in the House of Commons, perhaps then it needs to be looked at. But I think for the sake of democracy, it's better to have more parties involved than the old, red or blue that we've had effectively, well, for the last 100 years, because let's not forget the Lib Dems haven't won an election for 100 years, and they probably won't exist on May the 8th.
What have you got planned now between now and next Thursday when the election takes place?
Well, my plan tonight is just to kick back and keep on having a sip of a glass of wine, because we've been doing all these hustings and so forth. It's nothing rocket science, Chris. It's what you'd be expecting. It's outdoor knocking, dropping leaflets where we can, with the limited resources that we have, and that's pretty much it. On the day itself, speaking to our committed supporters, making sure they voted, speaking to people that are waivers and making sure they vote. But it's nothing untoward. It's everything that the other parties will be doing, but far more than us, simply because they've got the unions and big business backing them, and we don't have that. And that's just a fact of life. It's not a whinge. I'm just stating a fact.
Who's going to win in Watford?
Who's going to win in Watford? The winning party will win in Watford. I know what that's a real pathetic answer, but it's a politician's answer. If I hand on heart, if I knew who was going to win in Watford, I would tell you. I just don't know who's going to win in Watford. I think Richard's slightly ahead. Well, I don't know, because there's not been a poll, has there, since Ashcroft came down in November last year, and And you know, you look at the national polls. One day it's Labour, one day it's not. In Watford, who knows? But the national polls mean nothing in Watford because of the Lib Dems here. They're very strong. You know, people say about the Lib Dems getting wiped out. I think they pretty much will, but they won't in Watford. So that disperses the vote further. I think we're going to do well. Hand on heart, I'll give you an honest answer here, not a political answer. I really, really do not know, and I genuinely believe that. I just don't know.
I think it's going to be a fascinating result in Watford. I'm really interested to see not only what happens, but how many turn out, because it's likely to be, with all the hustings and everything else, the engagement, it's likely to be quite a good turnout, and that's
Oh, it's a very. I think. I mean, the population of Watford is about 80. The electorate is about 82,000. I think the turnout last time was about 52,000. I'm not. You know, I probably should know all this stuff, but it's boring, isn't it? It's the detail. Yeah, crikey, if we don't get a good turnout in Watford in this seat, then maybe we should just think of another system than democracy. Because if people aren't engaged here in this particular constituency in this fantastic town, then they'll never be engaged. I think we'll get a very good turnout, and I think whoever does win, it's going to be really, really tight. And you know, Watford's always one of the last constituencies that's called anyway. I think we're scheduled to be called at about 6 a.m. I can see a recount happening, and you know, this could be one of these ones that goes on. Not a Tower Hamlets, you know, it probably will get announced in 2015, but it could be, you know, it could be a really, really late on May the 8th before anybody knows who's won in Watford, and you know what? I think that's good. I think that's a good thing. I think there are rotten boroughs in the modern sense in this area, our surrounding constituencies, where the result is a foregone conclusion, where nobody can ever say that of Watford.
Excellent. All right, well, we'll wrap it up there, Nick, but thanks ever so much for coming on and sparing the time for the people of Watford, because that's what this is all about. So I wish you all the best in the run-up to the election, and have a great day on the 7th. And I think you're eagerly waiting the results as much as everybody else. So thanks very much.
No, Chris, thank you very much. And also thanks to the people of Watford that have come to the hustings over the last few weeks. The turnout's been fantastic. And I speak for myself, but I speak to the other candidates. It's been great to see the level of engagement. It's no fun necessarily coming out on a workday evening to hear politicians talk at you. And the response has been really good, so I've really enjoyed it, and thanks to everybody.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nick, and cheerio.
Thanks, Chris. Bye.
Bye.